Anyway, moving on, we're getting into the Notre Dame section of the podcast. Like we mentioned, Vince is our resident Notre Dame fan. And I guess before we really jump into it too much and get into the numbers of it all, where do you feel, you as a Notre Dame fan, how does it feel in South Bend? What's the temperature kind of the fan base with the new hires? There's been a lot of turnover there. I believe I think I saw only 3 coaches are actually in the same positions as they were a year ago. Yeah, like in the exact same position. So, like, what's the temperature of the fan base? How's it gelling? We know they're recruiting very well right now, but like what's the kind of the feeling from the fans?
I would say it's mostly like a feeling of refreshment. Like, I don't know, like it's not, no one thinks that we're going to go set the world on fire right now in year one. We're going to go win the national championship. No one is thinking that. But I feel like everyone in South Bend has gotten, it's kind of bad because we were such a bad place for so long, but in a way we've almost gotten used to 10-win seasons. We've gotten used to being the 8th best team in the country, that type of thing. Yeah. And that's good. Like, that's really good. But all Notre Dame fans, 40 years old and younger, pretty much, for the most part, like, none of us remember a national title, but we see that sign with 11 national titles listed. Like, we want that. You can relate, I'm sure, as a Georgia fan. Like, you want that national title because it is one of the biggest brands in college football. And we've seen people both inside the program and outside the program kind of make excuses for decades now about why we can't have that. You know, we have higher academic standards and that type of thing. Well, okay, but Notre Dame always had high academic standards. And there might be something like it might just be impossible. It might not happen. But finally there's just something about Marcus Freeman, the energy he's bringing, where it feels like he's embracing Notre Dame as opposed to making excuses for why it's so hard at Notre Dame. Like, he knows it's hard, but he doesn't act like it's hard. He's like, I got that Notre Dame logo on my chest. I can get into any living room in the country. Like, that to him is a positive. Somehow he flips being at Notre Dame into a positive as opposed to being a negative. And so it's just a different attitude. And that's why I think it feels refreshing for us Notre Dame fans. Obviously, the first place it shows up is in recruiting. And that's been, I think probably that's the biggest thing. Like, the biggest thing we've heard for the last 10, 15 years is we just can't recruit the athletes to compete on that top tier. Right. Like, we have to kind of settle for being a good developmental program that can be on the second tier, make it to the playoff when everything breaks perfectly. So I would say just the feeling from fans is very much like, finally we have a guy who is willing to embrace Notre Dame and is willing to actually try. Like, we're going to try to get to that top tier. We're going to try to be the best program in the country. It might not happen, but we're no longer in the excuses phase. We're no longer in the let's be the tallest midget phase. Like, we're trying to be the best team in the country, like, legitimately.
You talked about recruiting. Notre Dame currently with the number 1 overall class for 2023. But I mean, do keep in mind there is still a lot. Like, even I don't know if you looked at the top 10 recently, but it includes schools like Louisville. Texas Tech currently has the number 2 class. Tennessee, Baylor, Arkansas, all in there, and Alabama not. Clemson not. Right. And I think those are schools like we'll certainly expect to see in the top 10 by the end of it. Like, Alabama's not finishing outside the top 5. Let's not kid ourselves. So, but Notre Dame has. I mean, they clearly have. It's clearly been an uptick, right? Like, definitely something has definitely changed there for Notre Dame. And it's tough to have the number 1 class. It's not like they threw a whole bunch of numbers at it. They have 11 commits. They only have 11 commits, which is the same as most of the other schools up there in the top. So it's not like they've just, padded their stats with a whole bunch of 3 stars. They don't have a 3-star. It's a bunch of 4 stars and a 5-star that they have right now. So like, what has he done? What has he done differently from a recruiting standpoint that maybe Brian Kelly wasn't tapping into?
The biggest thing we hear is just that he's so focused on recruiting. Like, he it's like priority number 1, 2, and 3 for him, basically. He said when he was hired, he said it was going to be his goal to be the primary recruiter for everybody, everybody that they want. Now that's probably not quite realistic, but for all the big names, like that's the guy. And I've read multiple interviews now of highly ranked players, and what head coach do you hear from the most? And it's always Marcus Freeman, and that means something. Like there's something to that. Just a year ago, the quarterback we got in our last class, Steve Angeli, who was a low 4-star, has some promise, but was kind of that stopgap guy. Had a walk-off touchdown in the Blue Gold game this spring. But anyway, a year ago, now we're hearing this. A lot of the writers, like a few of them, actually got in trouble over the years, the last decade, for pointing out that Brian Kelly was not putting a lot of effort into recruiting. Okay. And so they wouldn't actually come out and say it. Kind of had to read between the lines. And now, since he's gone, some of the stories come out. And one of the insiders mentioned this week that a year ago, he was asking Steve Angeli what was taking him so long to actually commit, because he was clearly a guy for Notre Dame. He was Notre Dame was clearly his leader, but it just took a long time for him to actually commit. And he said the reason he was hesitant was because he hadn't heard from the coach yet. Their quarterback commit in the class, had not heard from the head coach. And I know it sounds like sour grapes, but literally these are the stories that we're hearing.
But that matters though.
That matters
when you factor in that he's going to be going against guys like Saban and Kirby, Ryan Day. It's not uncommon for so I'm a Georgia fan. I kind of keep up with where Kirby's going, but he's often taking a helicopter on off days and just kind of barnstorming that northern Georgia area where he's always dropping in on kids. He lands on the practice field, meets with a couple kids, then goes to the next school down the road, and then to the next, and then to the next. And they go to Arch Manning's basketball games for random reasons. Those are in Louisiana. They're going to those games, and Nick Saban's there and Kirby's there and with their staff, it's very hands-on, and because that's what it takes. That's really what it takes, because you're trying to build a relationship with them. And I do think it's funny that these things come out after Kelly leaves. That he wasn't hands-on. Maybe a little unfair to Kelly, but he certainly hasn't recruited at this level. There's no question. This has definitely been an uptick for them, kind of similar to where we kind of when Dabo kind of got it rolling, in Clemson, where Clemson was always a brand, but he was able to take them and put them into the top. We're going against the best for the best players. We're going against just the brands. We're going against Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State. We're going against those dudes for the 5 stars. And that kind of seems to be where Notre Dame is trying to push themselves into, whereas they kind of were before, but they were definitely in a second tier. But make no mistake, if they hold on to the number 1 overall class, remains to be seen for sure. But if they can do that, they have vaulted themselves into another tier. Yeah.
And it's interesting looking back on Brian Kelly's past. I don't know if you remember early in his career at Notre Dame kind of had a tendency to go about 8-5, except the one year where they made the national championship game. But from about 2011 to 2013, there was about a 3-year stretch there where they did recruit at about a top 7 or 8 level. It was not quite where they are now, but it was better than they've been the last 5 years. Right. And it seemed like they kind of got screwed a little bit on some of those high-profile kids. Where some of them didn't work out. They weren't really Notre Dame fits. And after that, we heard Brian Kelly talk a lot about recruiting RKGs, right kind of guys, find the Notre Dame guys, and he was all focused on getting the right kind of guys. Yeah. And in a way, it really worked. I mean, you got 5 straight double-digit win seasons out of it. Marcus Freeman has been more about let's go get the best talent in the country and convince them that they can do Notre Dame. You might not perfectly fit there. And sure enough, they recently lost a commit, Justin Rhett, who you're probably familiar with, flipped to Georgia, maybe the number 10 corner in the country or something like that. And he was. Now I'm not making excuses, because obviously Georgia doesn't need any excuses for getting a talented player, but he was viewed as kind of Like some of the insiders were like, they were a little surprised when he committed to Notre Dame. Like he doesn't quite fit. So you are going to get burned a few times recruiting the way Marcus Freeman does at Notre Dame, because not everyone can really fits with Notre Dame very well.
Well, I think there's maybe like a misconception out there that if guys are transferring or leaving, that, you know, like it means that your program's rotten on the inside.
Right.
And like I'm going to say that's not really true. I think
exactly
that it's sometimes it's better to have an influx of talent and have so many talented players there that some are going to leave. That's what happens. Like A&M is going to have guys leave from their last class. They're not all going to stay there. Some of them, a bunch of them are going to go somewhere. I mean, almost positive that a bunch of them are going to be leaving. And that doesn't mean that A&M was wrong in doing it. Like it's good to go ahead and try to amass a whole bunch of talent, and then you lose what you lose. But you can't have the talent. Like you can't lose guys that if you never had them there to begin with. You know what I'm saying? And like, I think certain programs are punished for it. I think Clemson is maybe a little unjustly punished for it sometimes, where they recruit so well and they have a lot of really good talented players there. And some of them do leave. And we're like, well, it's because Dabo clearly is you know, he's elitist, right? And he's mean to the player. And like, not to stick up for Dabo because I'm not a huge Dabo fan, but that's not true. Like we can't say that he's doing a bad job and that the whole organization is rotten, because like we all know that that's not true. And like I'm beginning to have more and more respect for Freeman and for Notre Dame, kind of in that way, because they're doing it the way that I think it has to be done. Whereas it starts with recruiting. It starts with recruiting, and you can build from there. I think everything else kind of comes from that, but it absolutely starts with you being number one in the 2020, the 2023 composite rankings right now. It starts with that. That's a start.
Exactly. And right after the blue gold game, you know, he was a little press conference and they were asking different questions and the one question was, you know, what can you do between now and September to become a better coach? And he was like, recruit. That is all he is focused on right now. And in a way, like it might turn into, you know, okay, so the Vegas over under for this year right now for Notre Dame is 9.5 wins. Maybe they go 9-3 this year because he was a little less focused on some X's and O's. But I think in the long run, that'll sort itself out, because if you get those, it's like Kirby Smart has said, like it's really hard to outcoach talent. And that's what Marcus Freeman is trying to do at Notre Dame. And I think some of his other hires on staff, he's leaned a lot on Tommy Rees, who has done the job before.
Right.
He hired Al Golden from the Bengals to be his defensive coordinator. And Golden is not necessarily known as, like, recruiting was not necessarily his forte.
Right.
He's more the X's and O's guy. He's been described by some as a football genius, if you will. So I think Freeman knows he can kind of lean on his coordinators to take care of some of that stuff. And he's just going to get the best talent on the roster that he possibly can. And some of it will leave. Some of it won't work out. But if you have just that incredible level of talent, most likely the guys leaving are going to be backups. You know, from these top schools like Clemson and Georgia and Notre Dame and Texas A&M, if you're a starter, you know, those other things, you can kind of work through those other things that you might not love. Like if you're getting playing time, you're a starter, it's not as big of a deal.
I think that's exactly right. I think the fact that people want to label a program that has people transferring out or has decommits, that it's a rotten program, I think maybe it's just kind of where I'm trying to push back from. And I think that, I think Freeman's doing it the right way. I really do. And so we said 9-3 for this next year. And like, we'll just kind of run through the schedule here a little bit, kind of like what next year looks like for Notre Dame. Mm-hmm. They start off with an away game at the Horseshoe. They play Ohio State, who might be the best team. Well, okay, we both feel Alabama is, but Ohio State's probably second, right? Yeah. So they start off with going to the second best team in the country in the preseason, the Ohio State Buckeyes. I actually think that game's going to be closer than what probably anyone else thinks. I think Ohio State struggles with physical teams, and I think Notre Dame at its core is a physical football team. So in that way, like, I think that game will actually be close. I don't think it's going to be just a blowout. I do probably, you lean Ohio State. Let's say we give that one to Ohio State. You start off 0-1. like the rest of your schedule is still very winnable. You get Clemson. Clemson comes to your place to play late in the year. But like other than that, you have a away game at BYU and North Carolina, but like those, like you're probably better than them. You're probably going to be favored against those teams.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's no reason that 10-2 isn't very achievable this year. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's probably my prediction is 10-2. My early May 2nd prediction, of course.
Yes.
I like to qualify that. And we finish, of course, with USC. And I think, if we opened with USC, I'd be a lot more confident in that one. I still feel like a little bit like you said about Ohio State. Like I don't expect USC to be very good up front on either side. I do expect Notre Dame to be the tougher team in that game, to be more physical. Most likely a win. Like it feels like a 55% win, but that's a lot lower than I would have said in recent years. It's still like there's a lot of hype going on with USC. They're basically buying players now from other schools.
Yes.
Jordan Addison, the Biletnikoff winner, it's announced that he has an NIL deal with USC before he actually enters the transfer portal out of Pitt.
Correct.
Which feels like the just like that's the worst side of this new reality we have. Like that is uncool. Like that's just straight tampering. Again, that probably sounds like sour grapes coming from a Notre Dame fan. But I do expect USC to be a lot tougher this year than they have been the last several years. Boston College, like there's a few games like that are mildly tough. Like who knows what happens.
Sure.
Boston College, BYU, North Carolina, those are the types of games that you can lose if you don't bring your B game. Like you have to actually show up. It is a pretty weak schedule, though, outside of some of those big names that you mentioned. There's a lot of other games they should roll in. So it really comes down to the Ohio State, Clemson, USC, BYU, North Carolina games. Like those are the big games. At this point, I think Ohio State is really the only team that should decidedly be favored over Notre Dame. I don't see any reason why Notre Dame should not be able to beat Clemson, USC, North Carolina. Like maybe they probably drop one of those somewhere, but I'm not sure that they do it as an underdog. Like I think they probably get upset one time.
Yeah, no, like that's kind of maybe where I was leaning a little bit as well. Like Notre Dame and Clemson's so hard. Like Clemson's so hard to predict right now because we've seen them be kind of on top of college football, and then like last year it was like suddenly it just looked like it wasn't that they lost games. It looked like they had no talent. Yeah, that was maybe what kind of got me is it looked maybe worse than what it was. It looked like they had no talent and they had no threat on offense. Their defense had some guys, but even that, whatever, it wasn't Georgia's defense. Like you couldn't win with their defense. So like it's hard to say where Clemson's going to be, especially that late in the year when Notre Dame plays them. I mean, that could be the Cade Klubnik show for all we know by that point.
Yeah,
and they could be rolling. And maybe with USC too, I think we're assuming that Caleb Williams is going to just step in there and be a star. And they're going to have some guys, some good receivers, and spread the ball out. It's going to be cool and fun. But in the end, are they going to be better than Lincoln's teams in Oklahoma? Like no, like I don't think they will be. No, they won't be. Not even close. Like I think Lincoln's team's at like. So what are we saying that he's gaining by going to USC? This is Lincoln Riley we're talking about. Like I mean, he had a quarterback. He already had the quarterback. He brought it with him, literally. So it's the same quarterback. The receiving core was, extremely good at Oklahoma in his years there. And like he had good edge rushers, at least on defense. Like we don't know what USC is in the trenches. So yeah, like I think Notre Dame can beat USC that late in the year. And if they do that, if they're, I don't want to say that they can go to the playoff, especially if you're, what's the odds of them going to the playoff have to be pretty low, but I guess maybe, okay. So before we get into playoff talk, quarterback controversy at all? Is there just, refresh us non-Notre Dame fans with where Notre Dame is standing from the quarterback position.
Sure. So there's kind of been like on paper, like officially there's a competition between Tyler Buchner and Drew Pine.
Yeah,
I'm sure you remember Drew Pine filled in some against Wisconsin and Cincinnati last year and played fairly well.
He did.
In the blue gold game, which Tyler Buchner missed, by the way, he had a small injury. They said he would have played if it was a real game, that type of thing. But Drew Pine ended up playing for both sides. They had a blue team and a gold team. Everyone does it differently. They actually split their roster into two different teams. And Pine played for both and played as bad as you could have possibly imagined from Drew Pine. It was, I mean, he had 3 interceptions, and a lot of them, like there was one, it was a little dump off to a running back where he just overthrew him by like 2 yards, and a linebacker was there. It was ugly, and we've seen him play fairly well in real games against good teams.
Yes.
So it's probably just the type of thing where he's maybe a gamer, but his ceiling is low enough where, okay, so I guess long to narrow it down, no, there's not a quarterback controversy. Tyler Buckner will be the guy.
Okay.
Where this season could go downhill real quick is if we have an injury issue with Tyler Buckner. Because he is a runner. If he gets hurt and we actually have to rely on Pine long term, not just for, a couple drives in a game where teams can actually scout him, that type of thing, that's where it gets a little iffy, because I do think he's, a decent backup. Like I do think he can come in a pinch and do okay. I don't really want to see him as the guy. If Tyler Buckner goes down, that's going to be a problem.
What's the percentage right now? This is May 2nd. What's the percentage that Notre Dame gets to the playoff this year?
Just for my own thoughts.
Yes.
So I think it actually helps them that they play Ohio State and Clemson, because if they and USC, honestly, those might be the 3 conference favorites. I would lean Utah probably for the Pac-12.
Right.
But if they beat USC and Clemson, I think they're in, assuming they took care of business against everyone else, because they'll have like the ACC and the Pac-12's spots, basically. I give that at least a 35% chance of happening. My leaning would be 10-2, but I think this is probably a year where 11-1 is good enough, unlike last year.
So the thought there is so the Ohio State game is brutal. It is a tough game, and you can talk about teams with playoff chances. Like, do you want to play other really good teams, or would you rather just kind of cakewalk everyone? And would you want to be like super aggressive in your scheduling, and like what all does that mean? But like for Notre Dame, the lead off game against Ohio State can be like pretty tricky. Other than that, like it feels pretty winnable. And I will say 10-2, Notre Dame fans would probably be really happy with 10-2 after year one, especially with the recruiting class, if recruiting stays kind of at that level. Is there anything that we're missing before we kind of exit this Notre Dame talk? We're not really going to talk much about Notre Dame again until beginning of fall practice, really. So this is going to be the last time we really talk about Notre Dame. Is there anything else that we're missing there, or something to look forward to for the next couple of months, kind of in this dead period of college football?
So I'd say the biggest thing, probably the next few months, the biggest hole on the roster is really no secret. There's a serious numbers shortage at receiver. And so I think Notre Dame will be looking to bring in at least 2 guys from the portal if they find decent guys. There's one guy from Arizona State that I know they're looking at. Haven't heard a lot of other names though. That'll be huge because there's some talent there. They're just not deep at all, and they've had a few of them have struggled with injuries. So, like at one point this spring, they were literally working with 4 scholarship receivers, and they have one coming in this summer who was not. They had one receiver in their class, and he was not an early enrollee. So, and they're really high on him. Like he'll be a really good receiver, we think. Tobias Merriweather is his name. He might be just a guy to keep an eye on, just because like 2 years from now, I wouldn't be surprised if he was a 60 catch guy.
Right.
But who knows what he can be as a true freshman. But at Notre Dame, he's going to have as much chance as he would anywhere else as a true freshman, just because of the way the receiver room is. And, there's some talk that like Braden Lenzy was known for like his speed. Like he was an Oregon track star, so he was kind of a big profile guy. And has kind of underwhelmed, really. There's talk that he's really stepping up as a starter in the spring. Who knows? Like that might be legitimate. That might just be, hope springs eternal in the spring. Like it might be that type of thing. I think
Sure.
Lorenzo Styles, the sophomore, will be their legitimate true number one receiver. That was a big win over Ohio State a year ago. He was an Ohio State legacy, I believe. His younger brother is now a safety at Ohio State, 5-star Sonny Styles.
Okay. Yep.
Lorenzo, I think Ohio State actually wanted him as a corner, and that might be why he chose Notre Dame, because they were okay with him playing receiver. And then he went and had a really good freshman year, and I expect him to be the number one guy. So he might have a big game one, playing Ohio State, the school that didn't want him to play receiver. I don't know.
Right.
Just a little side conversation to have. The tight end room is, of course, a strength. Michael Mayer will be the first tight end off the board in next year's NFL draft.
Eric Gilbert, maybe? No,
maybe. But Brock Bowers is still going to be the guy for Georgia.
Yeah, so that's fair. And Brock can't come out this next year. So
yeah. But anyway, yeah. So I think there's other receiving options. Like some of the running backs might be decent at receiving. Chris Tyree, is a really fast player at running back who had over 100 yards in their bowl game receiving. So I expect they'll have to mix in quite a bit of running backs and tight ends just to kind of compensate for the lack of bodies at receiver. That's going to be the biggest thing.
That like works though. Like that's its own brand of offense that really can work. I think people think that maybe like you're too dependent on a running back and a tight end, say for your receiving yards. It's actually like really effective. Like your matchup, you're really just a matchup nightmare for certain guys, trying to make them play either a linebacker or a safety against a running back or a really big physical tight end. So I think those are actually, it's not a terrible place to be, because Michael Mayer is obviously a stud. Tyree was he was extremely highly, I think he was a 5-star coming in.
He was a 5-star for a while, and then late in his senior year, he dropped to a high 4. So,
okay. But like a speedster, a burner, no less, like a guy that has pretty good hands too. So like a receiver type at running back. And I think those two, like even just having those two, if you have any kind of physical presence at all from receiver on the outside, those two can really make it work for you and can open up a lot of things, especially if you have they kind of have, like, Buckner's kind of a runner a little too. Yeah. Like he's definitely a dual threat, and that's its own brand of offense. And it can be neat in the modern day where, you should step back and try to throw it 50 times or whatever. This is very much a change of pace, kind of back to like what Oregon used to do, in the day where we first started the spread offense, kind of like that zone read type stuff, which can be really fun to watch too. So I guess maybe what I'm saying is let's not just, condemn them and say that, like Notre Dame has no weapons. They definitely do have weapons and can be really effective.
I do think you touched on what their true offense will be like. And I think they're going to be a big time running team this year. It was impossible last year because their offensive line was so bad. And Jack Cohn, of course, does not help anybody's running game at all. I do think he will actually be a decent backup quarterback in the NFL, just because the things that they will ask him to do in the NFL are a lot different than in college. But Tyler Buckner is a legitimate running threat. Like, he can go for 100 yards easily in a game. And they really like their running back room. They lost Kyron Williams to the NFL, but there's 4 running backs they feel really good about. Logan Diggs was a freshman like a year ago. Audric Estime, another freshman. Chris Tyree, who we mentioned. And then true freshman Jadarian Price. J.D. Price out of Texas. Had a bunch of big offers. Early enrollee, and lit it up in the spring game. And everything you hear from practice is like there's like they had like 11 early enrollees, and they said there's one guy on offense and one guy on defense that immediately they know they're a hit, and he's one of them. J.D. Price will be a weapon in their backfield, also receiving. It's a full running back room. So I expect between Buckner and the running backs and Harry Heastand back at offensive line coach, his thing was always he always had pretty good run blocking teams, it seemed like, at Notre Dame when he was there the first time. So I expect the running game to be the bread and butter. The passing game, I think it'll be okay. It's not going to be Ohio State. Like, it's not. Yeah. And that's probably, like, if they get into a track meet with Ohio State, they won't be able to keep up because of that. I
Right.
think it will be passable. It's going to have to be a complement essentially to the running game, and this might be the type of year where if they face a really good defense that keys on the run, they might have some issues with that. There's a chance that they will have some problems with that. Yeah, if I'm Jim Knowles, Ohio State's defensive coordinator, I am totally keying on the run. I am bringing everyone up in the box, and I'm making them beat me over the top. They might do it, but I would be a lot more scared of Notre Dame's running game this next year than their passing game.
See, and maybe that's why I think that game will be fairly tight. The Notre Dame Ohio State game I'm talking about, because that's what Ohio State was trying to do to Michigan last year. Couldn't do it. That's what they're trying to do to Oregon last year. Couldn't do it. And I know they have a new DC in, and that's great. That really, it's needed. That's needed.
Mm-hmm.
But can he make your defensive lineman, not get blown off the ball over an offseason? I don't know. I'm really not sure. Scheme will help. Sure. No doubt they'll probably be a little bit improved, because you couldn't get much worse than they, at least on runs to the left. But yeah, that's why I think maybe Notre Dame can kind of keep that close, just from an ability just to slow it down, run clock, keep this game slow, fewer possessions, Stroud off the field, Stroud out of rhythm. Maybe that's all really conducive to Notre Dame staying in that football game. I still think Ohio State will probably win. I think it'll be closer maybe than what people will think.
Yeah.
I had a few things to talk about just on the defensive side of the ball. Two players in particular, Brandon Joseph, one of them, and then the other one is Jalen Sneed.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So those are both really big gets for Notre Dame. One was in the portal, one was through recruiting. What's the initial talk right now about those two guys?
So Brandon Joseph, everything that we were hearing from spring was that he was getting an interception in every single practice. So I do think he will be a hit. I have seen some early mock drafts for next year where he's a mid first round pick.
Yeah.
I think that's probably a bit optimistic. I don't think he quite has the measurables that Kyle Hamilton has, even though we talked about Hamilton. He might be just as fast as Hamilton. I don't know. We talked about that was the weakness, but Hamilton was really good in all other measurables. He's tall, he's rangy, he's long, he's quick, all of that. I'm not sure that Joseph is quite the athletic freak. So I would imagine he'll probably be a second round pick. That to me feels like that would be about what we can expect out of him. I think he'll be good. It's a little harder to stand out on Notre Dame's defense than Northwestern's. so I don't expect him maybe to be quite 2 years ago. He was an All-American at Northwestern, as a redshirt freshman, I believe.
Yeah,
I don't expect that from him. I wouldn't be shocked if he was, because I do think he'll be on a big name program that will win a bunch of games, and I think he'll be really productive. But I don't think that he will be Kyle Hamilton, because that's impossible.
Yeah.
So I think he'll be very good, and he'll probably be the clear best safety on Notre Dame's team, I would imagine.
So for Jalen Sneed then, and we'll transition onto that, 5-star coming in. Mm-hmm. He was the number 3 linebacker overall. They got him out of Hilton Head, South Carolina, which Clemson country, right? How did they do that? How did Clemson let him go? And then how was Notre Dame the one to get him?
Marcus Freeman. That's how. Straight and simple. He basically came out and said when Kelly left that if Marcus Freeman leaves, he's decommitting. The only way he stayed with Notre Dame was Marcus Freeman. And that was a simple case of shopping down a different aisle, is a phrase we've heard a lot the last couple months as Notre Dame fans. Brian Kelly he used that phrase kind of in a different way. He said Notre Dame has to shop down a different aisle. And Marcus Freeman is just hitting up all the aisles. He's just going to all the aisles. So he actually had the audacity to offer a Tyson Ford a little over a year ago, 4-star defensive lineman who was an Oklahoma lock. And then Marcus Freeman was basically had the audacity to say, hey, let's offer this guy just in case. Mm-hmm. And he came to Notre Dame, and it sounds like he will be in the rotation from day one. And he had the audacity to go offer Jalen Sneed and show him what Notre Dame could do for him. And he might not be I don't know anything about Jalen Sneed that much personally. My read from far away is that he's probably not the kind of kid who grew up dreaming of going to an elite academic institution. And, like he's a football kid,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
he was sold on Notre Dame enough. He's willing to do the work. From what from obviously he's a true freshman. We don't know that for a fact for 3 years, but Marcus Freeman got him because he had the audacity to try to get him.
Right.
I would say some of the early reports on him, he came in a little bit lighter than expected, right around 200 pounds.
Okay.
So he'll be the backup rover, I would say, from what we hear, and he'll play. Like I think he'll play as a true freshman. He won't. He most likely will not be a starter. Jack Kaiser is kind of the entrenched starter there, is just one of those guys that you just feel comfortable with. Like he's not going to screw your defense up. He's smart. He's fast. He's actually very athletic. I say that because he's a white guy from Indiana, but he is actually like a very good athlete. So I think Jalen Sneed has a year to learn behind an established starter. I don't expect him to have like some 50 tackle season, but he'll probably play special teams, I would imagine. And that's kind of what you're looking for. They've recruited well enough defensively that they don't have to rely on any of these true freshmen to come in and make a huge impact right away. It's nice when they can come in and give you 20 snaps a game, though. And I think they'll get that from a few guys.
Well, like that is the thing, though, right? Like it's nice to have a good recruiting class, but I think A&M will find out when they're all just freshmen, when all these guys are just freshmen, it's really difficult to win games. Oftentimes, like the sweet spot is when you had a class 3 or 4 years down the road. That's when it really pays dividends. And that's when like top to bottom, that's when that the whole class really has matured and you really get a feel for how the class was itself. I think like Georgia 2018 class just got drafted, right? Like that class just got drafted. 15 of them got drafted on over the weekend. That's crazy. 5 of them were 5 of them were first rounders. Like it's silly. Justin Fields was in that class and transferred out. There's like you look through that class and it's just like, holy cow. And that's what I think that's what you need from your class. And it's nice to have a few guys, and there will be a few guys that will be, like day one contributors, or at least like in spot downs, like gonna say, they'll play on a 2nd and 7 or something like that, in the middle of the game. But as far as like impact, like leadership and impact, usually you're going to have to wait until, sophomore, junior year for that really to materialize. And that's probably how it's going to be for Steed. Was he more of like a speed guy? I haven't really found much on him as far as measurables. Like Sneed? What was kind of, Sneed.
Definitely a speed guy. And that might make sense why he's a little lighter coming into camp than they might have expected. But I think he was even quoted when he signed that he thinks he's the fastest linebacker on the team right away. And he might be, which is, that's a good place to start.
Right.
I would say the bigger name, I mentioned that there's 2 guys in spring camp that really like, oh, that's a hit. Like they can tell. J.D. Price was the running back. The other one is Jaden Mickey, who is a 4-star corner from California and will probably be the number 3 corner immediately. And I wouldn't be surprised if he was starting by the end of the year. By all accounts, he's maybe the fastest corner on the team and just a really good football player. One of those guys that just comes in and you can tell right away. That Julian Love was the same way. He was actually just a 3-star. But they said he came into camp and they could just tell right away he was just a football player. Like he just knew the game. And that's kind of what we're hearing about Jaden Mickey. So that would be the big name I would keep in mind as far as true freshmen making an impact for Notre Dame this year.
Gotcha. Just kind of wrapping up here a little bit, anything else that we need to be aware of? Any other names to key in on?
I think probably the MVP of the defense this year will be Marist Leofau, who you've probably never heard of.
Never.
Won the starting will linebacker job a year ago in fall camp over the returning starter, and ended up getting hurt like a week before the season started. Missed the entire season. Hawaiian kid, long, rangy, athletic, all of that. But that's the guy that they've been raving about in camp now for a year and a half. Marist Leofau.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
It's some of those names, especially like the Samoan names. I think we all struggled with Tua's name, what was it, 3 years ago, and then DJ Younglele. But after a while, you say it a couple of times, and the next one, by the way, is going to be Tennessee's new quarterback. Nico. We'll call him Nico for now. But like some of those names, it's funny how like you're like, wow, I'll never know that name. How can I ever say that name right? And then, a few short months later, it just kind of rolls off the tongue for you. But
I've been hearing reporters settle in on Iamaliava.
So I heard an Iamaliava. Yeah, there's so many different ways, but I think we just have to wait. And I think the ESPN announcers will often kind of dictate how someone really says that name. So we'll have to wait until he really gets on campus. And really has some actual playing time before we can actually settle on a name for young Nico from Long Beach. So just real quick, just to kind of go through the coaches, first year coaches, Marcus Freeman is one of them. Some guys get there in their first couple of months, you can just tell that it's clicking and that it works. It works where it's at. Sam Pittman was one of those guys a couple of years ago. Everyone made fun of that hire, but it worked. It just worked. It's continuing to work. I would say Dan Lanning is probably getting bang for his buck out there in Oregon right now. He's doing well. He's having some hits on the recruiting trail, and he's in contention for people. Well, money is part of it. There's no question.
There's nothing wrong with that, by the way. I'm just saying that's part of it. Yeah,
it's part of it. That's the way it is now. But there's no doubt that Marcus Freeman is doing better than I thought that he would do in his first couple of months as the head coach. Just again, nothing really matters until we start playing on the field. That's when it really kicks in. And that's when you can really tell. But there is momentum right now, I think, in South Bend. And this is from a neutral observer. I don't know Notre Dame. I don't care. But there is definitely momentum there in South Bend. And I think if I was a Notre Dame fan, refreshing would be the word. It would feel really good just to have a feel good. It would feel good to feel good, if that makes sense. And the vibes would be really positive. Just steal that phrase. There we go. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say kind of part of that. Like I've seen a lot of, you know how fans online are. Like there's been a lot of LSU and Notre Dame fans kind of going at it. And LSU fans obviously calling Notre Dame fans butthurt, like Notre Dame fans are in shambles because Brian Kelly left them for us. My take on it is it can work out for both parties. Like Brian Kelly's a very good coach. In a way, he's exactly maybe what LSU needs right now, just some stability. But it is very refreshing to have a coach who seems to actually like Notre Dame and wants to recruit. Like that, there's something just very refreshing about that. So I don't think Notre Dame fans are actually in shambles. Now there's always that little sliver, like this might not work out because I'm sure Alabama fans had that little sliver when they hired Nick Saban. I'm sure you had that little sliver when you hired Kirby Smart. That's a reality. But if I was betting on this, I would bet that this is going to work out and it feels really good.
And that's where you want to be. There is no sure thing when you hire a head coach. There's no sure thing, but you can get it to be as sure as possible. And I think a really good place to be is if you are succeeding, are you succeeding with the guy that wants to be there too? And I think maybe you hit on it. Like Freeman really, he wants to be there. Like it's mutual. Like the feelings there are mutual. And I think outside parties are beginning to kind of catch on to that. So